Hello viewers and welcome to NMN Vlogs. Today's topic of discussion is whether force majeure clauses be effectively invoked against a pandemic like COVID-19. But before we proceed further, it is pertinent to mention at the outset that this pandemic has caused huge losses to the businesses worldwide, and the estimate of GDP contraction globally is about 3%. Particularly for those involved in cross-border transactions, this pandemic is a havoc because the international borders are sealed. Therefore, people are searching for escape routes to exempt their liability under contractual obligations, and in turn, the emphasis is being laid on invoking the force majeure clauses under the contracts. This leads to an obvious question. What is a force majeure clause? In simple words, they are liability exemption clause on the happening of an event as described in the contract. However, these clauses are fact specific. Now, one may argue that many countries, including India, has already called COVID-19 a force majeure event. Therefore, one may ask, where is the difficulty to invoke the force majeure clause? However, the point to think about is that most of the governments has said so from a nationalistic point of view. But when we talk about international transactions, this is not the case. Look at the example of Shell Total and South African wind industry. The number of denials are rising, which again leads us to what is the requirement of successful invocation of a force majeure clause. Number one, the party at default could not reasonably foresee the upcoming disaster. Number two, the party at default tried to mitigate the damage caused by that disaster or alternatively tried to perform the contract. And number three, the party at default invoked the force majeure clause according to the prescribed manner written down in the contract. However, even if you fulfill the specific requirements, you are on a slippery slope, and these are the points for consideration. Was COVID-19 universally enforceable? Let us understand this point through an interesting example. Countries like China, Italy, or Spain experienced the first outbreak of COVID-19 in late 2019 or early 2020. On the other hand, some countries like India, Indonesia, or Philippines experienced the same in March 2020 for the first time. Therefore, a claimant seeking a claim against the respondent of India, Indonesia, or Philippines may very well argue that for them, the COVID-19 was not unforeseeable. Even otherwise, there is a looming question of speedy performance or alternate performance, which can be tested against the outbreak of COVID-19 in a particular country vis-a-vis the outbreak of COVID-19 in China, where it first began. In the lapse of time, because different countries experienced coronavirus at different times, it can be argued by the petitioner that for a particular country, COVID-19 was not unforeseeable. Second point for consideration is making in country X but selling as made in country Y. Again, it would be better to understand through an example, and for that, please have a look at this video of CNBC.
When you say made in country X, it's really an oversimplification of what it really is.
That's Omar Slim, a senior portfolio manager at global asset manager PineBridge.
You know, when you hear about made in this country or that country, it's really quite relative, and it's a simplification of things because it's most likely made in a number of countries.
Here's an example. Let's say we want to make lasagna for dinner. If Jeff cooks the ground beef and prepares the cheese, Sarah makes the tomato sauce and layers the ingredients into a pan, and Blair, who bought all the ingredients, puts it in the oven, who gets the credit for making the lasagna? Now let's apply that to Apple's iPhone. While the phone might say made in China, some parts of it come from other parts of Asia, Europe, and even the US. But here's the catch. Even though an iPhone may be assembled in China, it's still tariffed in China as a US product because Apple is an American company. The brand makes that clear with its etching designed by Apple in California.
How they're treated in terms of customs, they will be treated as a US product. So regardless of where they come, it's essentially a US product. Same for Chinese products going into the US, and same for instance, European cars.
Now let's take a company which manufactures in Germany but assembles its product in China and then sells that product as made in China. For such a company to invoke force majeure clause seeking liability exemption because there was outbreak of COVID-19 in China will be a tough call, and it would be very, very interesting to see. The last and the third point for consideration is the application for but-for test. The but-for test is applied to see the real intention of the parties to perform its contractual obligations. Let's take a company which is not willing to perform its contract but takes the route of force majeure to seek exemption from its liability, saying that because there was a pandemic, i.e. the force majeure event, it could not fulfill its contractual obligations. However, the reality is contrary. Therefore, the court or the tribunal applies this but-for test to see whether there was intention of that company to perform or not, and decide accordingly. I may not have covered all, but these are the few scenarios that will deliver the judgments and awards on force majeure clauses which are going to be followed in the near future. Thanks for watching this video, and if you like it, please don't forget to subscribe it.